Hi, my name is Theo Gonzalves, and welcome to Viral Histories, stories of racism, resilience, and resistance. In this series, we're exploring the impact that the pandemic is having on the Asian American community. Today, we're talking with Russell Jeung, who is a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. Russell helped to create a website that allows people to report incidents of hate against persons of Asian heritage. We'll be thinking about how a community rallies in the face of racial and ethnic discrimination in the middle of a public health emergency. My co-host for the series is Lintaro Donovan, who is a high school student in Maryland.
Hello America, break your backs for dollars, they don't carry ya. 7,000 miles away from home with language barriers, land of opportunity. Tell me, is it good to you? But
So my first question is, why did you start your organization, and how exactly has the problem of anti-Asian discrimination, which was extant before the pandemic, how has it grown because of the pandemic?
That's a good question, thanks. And thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
As an Asian American Studies faculty member, I knew that in past epidemics, Asians would get scapegoated and targeted as the cause of the pandemic. And so I knew once coronavirus was going to spread and that it was coming from China, that Chinese in the US would be blamed and then therefore experience incidents of discrimination and harassment. So I immediately wanted to document what was going on in order to get a response from the government, because it's the government's responsibility to provide for public safety. And I knew that without good documentation, no one would believe that Asian Americans were facing such harassment. Initially, I looked at news accounts because that was the only secondary source data, but eventually we started our own website and we got a flood of personal accounts, firsthand accounts of how Asian Americans are experiencing racism because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. I find it very interesting about how you mentioned in previous epidemics that Asians were scapegoated or targeted. People would claim that they're, causing the pandemic, something like that. Could you give maybe recent examples or relatively recent examples from American history when that's happened?
Well, the most recent one that Asian Americans were blamed was SARS in 2003. And so again, it's a natural disease, it's a virus, but a particular people are blamed and a particular place is blamed for causing the disease. And really, pandemics spread naturally through community spread, and it's not like a people designed to spread it.
Now, Russell, can you think about what this means historically? How have Asian Americans been in this particular moment before? What does it mean in terms of Asian American history to consider the relationship between public health and race?
Yeah, so history repeats itself. In the 19th century, the White Working Men's Party, they blamed Chinese for making white workers lose their jobs, but they also blamed Chinese for bringing in the diseases of smallpox, leprosy, and malaria. So they used that rationale, economic competition and disease, and also the fact that Chinese were non-Christian and were seen as pagans. They used that reasoning to exclude Chinese, and they passed legislation, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, to get rid of the competition, to blame them for the diseases, and to help particular politicians get ahead. And so you see the same sort of practice happening today, politicians using this disease as a way to rile up their base, seeing China as a target to blame, and Chinese people as the source of their economic woes. So it's sort of scary how it repeats itself. But in the 19th century, one other way that history repeats itself is that Chinese really resisted that discrimination. They filed thousands of appeals in the courts against the Chinese Exclusion Act. They created a mass boycott against American goods, and they engaged in the largest case of mass civil disobedience at that time. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese actually didn't register or obey the government in requiring them to get an alien certificate card. So today we're seeing history repeat itself, and I see a lot of Asian American groups resisting and combating the racism that they face today.
So the resistance to this is also historic as well. It also comes in cycles. We're seeing this in the present tense, how politicians are referring to this as a Chinese virus. What's wrong with referring to it that way?
So the problem of calling it the Chinese virus is that a particular group of people get stigmatized, they get blamed, and as a result, they get harassed and targeted for being the source of the disease. They get feared as being the disease carriers, and they get people see them as threats, as outsiders. And we see that happening all across the nation.
And in the website that you created at Stop AAPI Hate, it collected, well, how many incidents are now collected there? Is it close to about 2,000?
Yeah, it's almost 2,000 now. We just started it a little bit over a month ago. And again, we didn't publicize the site that much, but I think Asian Americans across the nation really wanted to share their stories, to develop a collective voice so that we could respond well, so that we could have data and have targeted interventions responding to the evidence. What's remarkable is that a lot of our reports are coming from non-English speaking people, that they care enough that they wanted to express their outrage over facing this inequality. A lot of the incidents are being reported by elderly. So you don't think of Asian American elderly taking the time to get on the internet and file a report. But yeah, over 10% of our cases are coming from Asian American elderly. That's pretty remarkable.
And compared to the amount of people who have used your website and reported, how many incidents do you believe have gone unreported? Is there, how much of a mass incidence is there when it comes to this discrimination?
Everybody who's Asian American is only like 1 degree of separation from someone who's been harassed or shunned or attacked. 90% of Asian Americans today now fear racial bias because of COVID-19. So that's pretty telling that almost everybody in the Asian American community is fearful at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Russell, can we talk about how the community is trying to respond directly to it? So they're using your website as a tool to report many of these incidents, but what are some of the ways in which the Asian American community is responding?
The Asian American community is responding on a variety of ways, depending on their location and depending on like what institutions or groups they're affiliated with. Our elected officials, I think, are taking a really strong stand on both the congressional level and on the state level, passing resolutions to denounce anti-Asian hate and rhetoric. On the media level, which again circulates a lot of these negative images of Chinese and the virus. In the media, we've created our own hashtag movements like Wash the Hate, or I Am Not a Virus, or Racism is a Virus. On the community level, I see groups, unions, faith-based groups, a lot of schools are just making their own statements saying, we denounce this type of behavior, we don't condone it. And those words matter, right? Just as the words Chinese virus matter, the words that say, we will not condone any racism, they matter and they help people create a culture of civility and respect. And then on the individual level, I think a lot of people are being good bystanders, that when they see this type of discrimination, they're intervening and checking in with the targeted individual, seeing if they need assistance. So I think we have a lot of allies right now. Even as much as we see a lot of racism, we see a lot of people supporting Asian Americans and realizing that this type of discrimination is wrong.
Historically and in the present, Asian Americans have generally been the least politically active of most of the major minority groups in the country. I believe in 2012, Asian American turnout was around 49% compared to over 60% for African Americans. Those numbers are very rough. But do you think because of this pandemic, because of the very political issues which it has brought attention to, especially when it comes to fighting hate crimes and discrimination targeting Asian American community, do you think that this pandemic might be a turning point, that this might ignite new civic engagement in future elections?
I think Asian Americans have always been politically active. They may not always vote in the United States because a lot of them aren't citizens, or they may not get targeted for campaign materials because they're new voters and not likely voters. But they are always engaged in their local communities or even transnationally. But I do think, like you said, this is a galvanizing moment for the Asian American community. First of all, it's not just Chinese who are being affected. It's a very pan-Asian experience, especially if you look East Asian. And so that a lot of people, different people are being targeted. 60% of those reporting are not Chinese, but they're other Asian ethnicities. It's a issue that cuts across us on class lines, so that even if you think, oh, I've made it in the US, I'm well educated, I have high professional status, even those healthcare professionals, they're getting harassed and shunned in the medical. And then again, working class Asians, they're losing their livelihood because people are boycotting Asian restaurants and nail salons. So it's affecting us across class, it's affecting us across ethnicity. As we understand that we're being racially profiled as outsiders, as threats, as dangerous, I think we'll understand how other groups are also being racially profiled and therefore being incarcerated, therefore being detained, therefore being deported, therefore being banned. Asian Americans are going to experience this and realize, wow, we hold a lot in common with other people of color. I think that'll also mobilize us.
I was just wondering, do you think that this might also be a moment of, I guess, pan-minority unity, that this might ignite more of a, I guess, social justice movement within Asian communities that isn't just about Asian Americans, but more all minorities' rights?
Right, yeah, I agree. It's going to be both a pan-Asian movement, but it's also going to align us and give us a greater sense of solidarity with other people of color as well. You could tell from COVID-19 all the structural racism in the United States. It's becoming more and more apparent as African Americans are infected at higher rates, as the Navajo Nation is infected at higher rates, as the Hispanic Latinx community has higher rates of unemployment, and as Asian Americans discriminated. You could see, wow, there's clear racial disparities being revealed by COVID-19. So Asian Americans are affected by this anti-Asian hate, but this isn't an Asian American problem. This isn't an Asian American issue. This is actually other people's issue with us. This is other people's problem with us. It's other people's racism. So in that sense, the Asian American community can resist and respond, but it's going to take a societal response to erase hate. And so that's why we're really pushing to hold government accountable, because government's the one that's supposed to be responsible for public safety and also providing safe accommodations. Everybody has a right to get safe access to goods and services, but Asians aren't getting that safe access right now. They're getting harassed, they're getting pushed out, they're getting spat upon. And so we're really working and hoping that government officials would take stronger stands against this anti-Asian hate.
So once again, thank you. We'll thank Lintaro Donovan, who served as our co-host for today. And thanks especially to Russell Jeung, who is a chair and professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. Stay tuned today for the live Q&A session at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll see you soon.
Hello, America. Break your backs for dollars, they don't carry ya. 7,000 miles away from home with language barriers. Land of opportunity. Tell me, is it good to you? But 6 feet deep on stolen land.